The Irish Brigade, the Civil War, and my family. Episode 186. The bravest unit in the Civil War was Irish. If you have Irish ancestry and your family arrived in America in the decades before the Civil War, then it's possible that someone in your bloodline was a soldier of the Irish Brigade. It was the most celebrated, most decorated, and most devastated immigrant fighting unit in American military history. And the story of why they fought the way they did is not a story about war. It is a story about what it means to claim a country that has not yet claimed you back. The Irish Brigade was formed in 1861 from the Irish immigrant communities in Massachusetts, New York, and Pennsylvania. The men who enlisted had arrived in America with nothing. They had been met with signs saying no Irish need apply for jobs. They were told in newspapers and in their daily lives that they were really not quite American and might never be. They enlisted anyway, and they fought with a ferocity that their commanding officers struggled to explain and their enemies struggled to withstand. At Antietam, Maryland, the Irish Brigade charged a Confederate position across open ground under direct fire and took casualties that would have broken most units entirely, but they kept moving forward. At Fredericksburg, Virginia, they charged the stone wall 14 times. 14 times across open ground into concentrated fire. The wall never fell. They charged it anyway because they had decided that dying for this country was the fastest way to make it theirs. Leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg, the brigade recovered several hundred of its injured from Fredericksburg and was able to field nearly 600 men, barely at regimental size. At Gettysburg, the brigade distinguished itself in the wheat field under the command of Colonel Patrick Kelly as the 2nd Brigade. Under overwhelming pressure, this shattered brigade held its ground for a lengthy period of time. The brigade has a monument on the Gettysburg battlefield. By the end of that war, the Irish Brigade has suffered a casualty rate of over 4,000 men from an original strength of 7,000. They had earned more battle honors than any other immigrant unit in the war. They had done it under a green flag with a golden harp because they were not yet sure America would claim them, but they were absolutely sure they were going to claim America. Your ancestors may have been one of them, young, Irish, newly arrived, and willing to die for a country that was still making up its mind about whether the Irish belonged. As I previously said, the Irish Brigade was a Civil War infantry brigade consisting predominantly of Irish Americans. The designation of the 1st Regiment in the brigade as the 69th New York Infantry, or the Fighting 69th, continued into later wars. The Irish Brigade was known in part for its famous Irish language war cry, Fa a Bally, which translates into English as clear the way. It was used in various majority Irish military units founded in the Irish diaspora. Many Irish Americans formed their own military units which embraced Irish customs such as Catholic masses and priests. There were 3 core regiments of the Irish Brigade, the 69th, the 88th, and the 63rd. The 69th New York Volunteers was largely made up of pre-war 69th New York Militia. That unit gained notoriety prior to the Civil War when Colonel Michael Corcoran refused in order to parade his regiment for the Prince of Wales. That was the to-be British king. During his visit to New York City. The 88th was named after the British 88th Connaught Rangers, which was an Irish group, and was the 2nd Regiment Irish Brigade. After Chancellorsville, the new brigade commander, Colonel Patrick Kelly of the 88th, formed these core New York regiments, which consisted of only 220 soldiers, into a single battalion under the flag of the 88th. The 63rd New York Volunteers, known as the 3rd Irish, was composed mainly of the old 9th New York Militia and several hundred Irishmen recruited in Boston. Where else? The 63rd was organized by Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Kelly and was later commanded by Colonel Richard Enright. General Thomas Maher was a well-known leader of the Irish Brigade during the Civil War. He was previously an Irish nationalist and leader of the Young Irelanders in the Irish Rebellion of 1848. After being convicted of sedition, he was first sentenced to death but later received transportation for life to Tasmania in Australia. In 1852, Maher escaped and made his way to the United States, where he settled in New York City. He studied law, worked as a journalist, and traveled to lecture on the Irish cause for freedom. At the beginning of the American Civil War, Maher joined the U.S. Army and rose to the rank of brigadier general. He was most notable for recruiting and leading the Irish Brigade and encouraging support among Irish immigrants for the Union. Following the Civil War, Maher was appointed Montana's Territorial Secretary of State by President Andrew Johnson and served as acting territorial governor. Pardon the short break. I hope you are enjoying my Growing Up Poor in Irish Boston podcast. If you like these episodes, please subscribe. It's free and it helps me grow my audience. And now back to the Irish Brigade. There were Irish Americans on the Confederate side also. Although significant, not very many fewer Irish lived in the Confederate States. 6 Confederate generals were Irish-born, of whom Patrick Cleburne was the highest ranking. Units such as the Charleston Irish Volunteers attracted Confederate Irish Americans in South Carolina. The 24th Georgia Volunteer Infantry was another Southern force that was heavily Irish. Irish Tennesseans joined the 10th Tennessee Infantry Regiment. A company of the Missouri Volunteer Militia, commanded by Colonel Joseph Kelly, was the subject of a Confederate song, Kelly's Irish Brigade. The Louisiana Tigers, first raised by Major Chatham Wheat, also had a large number of Irish American members. The 33rd Virginia Infantry of the Stonewall Brigade was composed of mainly Irish immigrant volunteers. It was the first to make the infamous Rebel Yell at the first Bull Run, attacking the 14th New York forces at Henry Hill. The Davis Guard, a company of mostly Irish-American men from the Houston and Galveston, Texas area, won a lopsided victory at the Second Battle of Sabine Pass in 1863. They received the only physical medals awarded by the Confederate States of America, made from polished Mexican silver coins and hung from green ribbons to honor their Irish heritage. My mother's family, the Milans, from Galway, had Irish Brigade heroes like brothers Michael, John, and Thomas Milan. They were my great-granduncles. I have a sepia photo of the 3 brothers in Civil War uniforms. Brother John Milan starved to death at Andersonville Prison, an infamous Confederate prison camp in Georgia. On Brother Michael Milan's gravestone, born in 1824, is listed the Galway birth town, Mount Bellew. Michael had a suppurating gunshot wound from the war that never healed. He returned to his family in Southborough, Mass, and years later died of the wound. Without today's antibiotics, unhealed, festering wounds slowly killed the Civil War veterans. Thomas Milan, too, was wounded in the Civil War. These Irish immigrant Milans came from a generation before my grandfather, George Milan, who was born on April 25, 1876. George's mother and father, my great-grandparents, were Ellen Cahill Milan and Patrick Milan, born about 1850 in Ireland. War was hell for the Milans. The Fighting 69th fought in World War I as part of the Rainbow Division. For bravery displayed in Lorraine, Champagne-Marne, and Meuse-Argonne, the Medal of Honor was awarded to regiment members, including William Joseph Donovan and Richard O'Neill. By World War II, the Irish influence in the regiment had diminished somewhat, but the regiment served with distinction in the Pacific Theater as part of the 27th New York Infantry Division. Since 1907, the Fighting 69th has been a unit of the New York National Guard. In recent history, the 1st Battalion 69th Infantry, historically related to the Irish Brigade, served with distinction in Iraq from 2004 to 2005. The unit fought in and around Baghdad, most notably the surrounding area of Baghdad suburbs, and some related companies have since served in Afghanistan. The modern history of the Irish Brigade has been incorporated into the New York National Guard. It has been officially assigned as the Fighting 69th and is the only currently active military unit that form part of the Irish Brigade. The Irish in America have contributed much to our beloved country. The Irish Brigade was just one of those contributions. It was the most celebrated, most decorated, and most devastated immigrant fighting unit in American military history. In 1963, President Kennedy presented Ireland with a flag of the Irish Brigade.